On June 13, 2025, the fragile calm that had settled over the Middle East was shattered in an instant. Iran launched Operation Severe Punishment, a meticulously planned, large-scale missile and drone assault targeting Israel. This was not a covert operation or a limited strike. It was a bold, unmistakable message to the world and to Israel that the rules of engagement had changed overnight. The operation was the culmination of weeks of rising tensions, diplomatic warnings, and military posturing. But few expected the scale and audacity of what unfolded that night. As darkness blanketed the region, hundreds of projectiles, missiles, and drones streaked across the sky toward Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other major Israeli cities. The sheer volume of the attack was unprecedented, overwhelming even Israel's sophisticated air defense systems. Sirens blared across the country, and the night was punctuated by the thunder of explosions and the bright flashes of interceptor missiles desperately trying to stop the onslaught. For many Israelis, it was a night of terror and confusion, as the familiar sound of sirens gave way to the unfamiliar chaos of a full-scale assault. In city after city, families scrambled for safety, rushing to bomb shelters as the air raid sirens wailed. The night sky was transformed into a battlefield, lit by the fiery trails of incoming missiles and the counterattacks of Israel's Iron Dome and David's sling systems. Children clung to their parents, and entire neighborhoods huddled together underground, waiting for the barrage to end. The sense of vulnerability was palpable, as no one knew where the next missile would land or how long the attack would last. This massive assault was Iran's direct response to an Israeli airstrike just one day earlier, a strike that had killed a senior Iranian commander in Syria. The retaliation marked a dramatic and dangerous escalation, transforming a long-running shadow war into open, high-intensity conflict. For years, both nations had operated in the shadows, carrying out covert operations and proxy attacks, but now the conflict was out in the open, with devastating consequences for civilians and soldiers alike. In the aftermath, the streets of Tel Aviv and other cities were eerily empty. The blasts had reached deep into civilian areas, including Rishon LeZion and even near Israel's military headquarters. Buildings were damaged, fires raged, and emergency services struggled to keep up with the scale of destruction. The psychological impact was just as severe as the physical damage. Israelis were left shaken, uncertain of what might come next. For Iran, this was more than a military operation. It was a declaration of intent. Iranian officials appeared on television, vowing that any future Israeli aggression would be met with even greater force. In Tehran, crowds gathered, waving flags and chanting slogans, while Israel's military was placed on the highest alert. The message was clear. The era of limited, deniable conflict was over, and both sides were now openly preparing for the possibility of a wider war. Around the world, governments and citizens watched in shock as the regional order was violently upended. News outlets broadcast live footage of the attacks, and social media was flooded with images and videos from the ground. International leaders scrambled to respond, calling for restraint and warning of the unpredictable consequences that could follow. The sense of uncertainty was global, as no one could predict how far the conflict might spiral or what new alliances and enmities might emerge. As dawn broke over a battered Israel and a tense Middle East, it was clear that the region had entered a new, far more dangerous era. One where the risks of open war, civilian suffering, and regional instability had never been higher. The world was jolted awake by a sudden escalation in the Middle East. Iran's barrage, which would soon dominate global headlines, was triggered by a dramatic and unprecedented Israeli military operation. The region, already tense from years of shadow conflict, now faced a direct confrontation that many had feared, but few truly expected to unfold so rapidly. On the night of June 12th into the early hours of June 13th, 2025, Israel launched a bold preemptive strike. The operation was meticulously planned, with months of intelligence gathering and strategic preparation behind it. As jets roared into the night sky, the world watched in disbelief, realizing that a new chapter in the region's history was being written in real time. Israel's targets were Iran's most sensitive and heavily guarded nuclear sites, Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan. These facilities, long suspected of being at the heart of Iran's nuclear ambitions, were struck with precision munitions designed to penetrate fortified bunkers and disrupt critical infrastructure. The attacks left visible scars, craters, collapsed roofs, and plumes of smoke rising into the night. But the operation didn't stop there. Israeli forces also targeted missile factories and key military bases in Tehran and other strategic locations across Iran. These strikes aimed to cripple Iran's ability to retaliate and to send a clear message: Israel would not tolerate any existential threat. The attack was a complex blend of overwhelming air power and covert ground tactics. Israeli fighter jets flew in tight formation, evading Iranian air defenses, while special operations teams executed precision raids on high-value targets. Surveillance drones provided real-time intelligence, ensuring every move was calculated and effective. Mossad, Israel's legendary intelligence agency, played a pivotal role. Using pre-positioned drones and concealed missile launchers, they orchestrated a series of synchronized strikes. The use of advanced technology and cyber warfare further amplified the operation's impact, leaving Iranian defenses scrambling to respond. The human cost was staggering. 4 of Iran's top military commanders, including the powerful head of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Hossein Salami, and the chief of the armed forces, Mohammad Bagheri, were killed in the strikes. Their sudden deaths created a leadership vacuum at the highest levels of Iran's military, sending shockwaves through the country's defense establishment. Among the casualties were 2 of Iran's leading nuclear scientists, whose expertise had been crucial to the country's nuclear program. Their loss dealt a devastating blow to Iran's ambitions, setting back years of research and development. Laboratories were left in disarray, and the scientific community mourned the loss of its brightest minds. Just days before the attack, the International Atomic Energy Agency had declared Iran in breach of its non-proliferation obligations. This announcement provided Israel with a rare moment of international legitimacy, as many world powers quietly acknowledged the gravity of the threat posed by Iran's nuclear activities. The timing of the IAEA's statement gave Israel the diplomatic cover it needed to justify its actions on the world stage. In a televised address, Prime Minister Netanyahu defended the operation as a necessary act of self-defense. He argued that Israel faced a clear and present danger, and that decisive action was the only way to ensure the safety of its citizens. The speech was met with both praise and condemnation, reflecting the deep divisions within the international community. As news of the attack spread, Iran's streets erupted in anger and grief. Military vehicles mobilized, crowds gathered in protest, and the world braced for what would come next. The stage was set for Iran's furious retaliation, and the specter of a wider conflict loomed over the region. Israel's air defenses intercepted most threats, but some Iranian missiles broke through. 3 Israelis were killed, dozens injured, and buildings in Rishon LeZion and near Tel Aviv's military HQ were damaged. Residential neighborhoods suffered shattered windows and debris-strewn streets, disrupting daily life. Hospitals activated emergency protocols, moving patients to underground shelters. Families spent the night in bomb shelters, the psychological toll deepening with every explosion. Public shelters filled, and the nation's sense of security was shaken. The attack exposed the limits of even the most advanced defenses. For Israelis, the threat was no longer distant. It was at their doorstep. The sense of vulnerability was palpable. Israel's strike on Iran was devastating, killing 78 and injuring over 300. The deaths of IRGC Chief Salami, Army Chief Bagheri, and 2 top nuclear scientists left Iran's leadership reeling. Civilian casualties mounted as strikes hit urban areas, with residential buildings in Tehran and Tabriz damaged or destroyed. Images of ruined homes fueled public anger and grief. The attacks on Natanz, Fordow, and Isfahan dealt a severe blow to Iran's nuclear program. Iran's air defenses were exposed as vulnerable, and the regime faced humiliation and pressure to respond. The loss of leaders and civilians alike made retaliation inevitable. As Iran's missiles rained down, Israel's Iron Dome, David's Sling, and Arrow systems sprang into action. U.S. forces joined in, deploying Patriot and THAAD batteries to bolster defenses. The coordination was seamless, reflecting years of joint training and intelligence sharing. Some missiles were intercepted over Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Syria, revealing a quiet regional coalition against Iran's threat. Despite high interception rates, a few missiles penetrated, causing casualties and damage. Iran's saturation strategy tested the limits of missile defense. The battle in the skies was a technical victory, but it exposed persistent vulnerabilities. Even the best shield cannot guarantee perfect safety. The region's security equation had changed. The conflict's shockwaves rippled across the Middle East, grounding flights and closing airspace in Israel, Jordan, Iraq, and Iran. Major airports in Dubai and Doha faced chaos, and airlines rerouted or canceled hundreds of flights. Israel shut down its Tamar gas field, disrupting energy supplies to Egypt and highlighting regional interdependence. Jordan and Gulf states watched anxiously as missiles exploded overhead, fearing the conflict could spill across borders. The Strait of Hormuz became a flashpoint, with shipping companies fearing Iranian retaliation and insurance costs soaring. The economic and security fallout was immediate and far-reaching. A local war threatened to become a regional crisis. The world braced for wider consequences. In the aftermath, leaders in Israel and Iran delivered defiant speeches. Netanyahu defended Israel's strike as necessary, praised air defenses, and warned of further action if provoked. Khamenei vowed that Iran's retaliation was only the beginning, promising more severe consequences for Israel. Both leaders projected strength, rallying their nations for a prolonged confrontation. The U.S. clarified it had not participated in Israel's initial strike, urging restraint while offering to mediate. Russia condemned Israel's actions and offered to broker peace, while Europe and Arab states called for maximum restraint. The world pleaded for de-escalation, fearing a spiral into regional war. The crisis had become a global concern. The stakes had never been higher. The June 2025 clash was not an isolated event, but rather the climax of a long and turbulent period marked by mounting tensions and a series of flashpoints. It all began with the shocking Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023, an event that sent shockwaves throughout the region and set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately draw in powerful regional actors. The world watched as the situation rapidly deteriorated, with each side hardening its stance and preparing for the worst. The war in Gaza that followed was brutal and unrelenting, drawing in not just Israel and Hamas, but also emboldening Iran-backed groups across the region. Militias in Lebanon and Syria, long supported by Tehran, seized the moment to open new fronts, launching attacks and stretching Israel's military resources thin. The conflict spilled across borders, with Israeli soldiers on high alert, bracing for attacks from multiple directions. The sense of insecurity grew, and the region braced for a wider conflagration. By 2024, what had once been a shadow war between Iran and Israel was now out in the open. The world witnessed direct missile exchanges, brazen airstrikes, and a series of high-profile assassinations targeting key figures on both sides. Covert operations became more frequent and deadly, with each act of violence fueling the next. The boundaries between open warfare and clandestine operations blurred, and the stakes grew ever higher. The situation reached a critical juncture when the International Atomic Energy Agency announced that Iran had breached its non-proliferation agreements. This revelation sent shockwaves through the international community, providing Israel with what it saw as a final, undeniable pretext for military action. The world's attention turned to the Middle East, as leaders debated how to respond to the growing threat of nuclear proliferation and the possibility of a wider war. For Israel, launching a strike against Iran's nuclear facilities was seen as a last resort, a desperate attempt to halt what it viewed as an existential threat. For Iran, any retaliation was not just about defense, but about sovereignty, national pride, and sending a message to its adversaries and allies alike. The rhetoric on both sides grew more heated, and the world watched as military analysts debated the risks and potential consequences of a full-scale conflict. Each move on this geopolitical chessboard seemed to provoke a countermove, creating a dangerous spiral of escalation. Military convoys moved under the cover of darkness while diplomats scrambled to find a way out of the crisis. Behind closed doors, negotiations were tense and fraught with mistrust, as every decision carried the risk of igniting a wider war. The violence that erupted in 2025 was not sudden or unexpected. It was the result of years of mounting hostilities, failed diplomacy, and a steady escalation of both rhetoric and action. Protests grew larger and more volatile, while military clashes became more frequent and deadly. The world watched as the region edged closer and closer to the brink. By the time the June 2025 clash erupted, the stability of the entire Middle East was hanging by a thread. Ordinary people across the region lived in fear, watching the news with growing anxiety as the threat of war loomed ever larger. The path to escalation had been long and complex, shaped by history, politics, and the actions of countless individuals. Now, the world faced the consequences. Beneath the headlines, ordinary people in Israel and Iran bore the brunt of the conflict. In Israel, families huddled in shelters, children traumatized by sirens and explosions. Daily life was upended, schools closed, businesses shuttered, and anxiety gripped the nation. In Iran, Israeli strikes tore through residential towers, leaving families searching for survivors amid rubble and chaos. Hospitals overflowed, and grief mixed with anger at both Israel and the Iranian regime. The suffering was universal. Lives lost, homes destroyed, futures uncertain. The pain transcended borders, uniting civilians in fear and loss. The true cost of war was measured in shattered lives, not military gains. The scars would last long after the missiles stopped. The Middle East now stands at a crossroads, on the brink of wider war or a fragile pause. Israel faces pressure to retaliate again, risking a cycle of escalation. Iran must recover from leadership losses and public anger. The world urges diplomacy, but mistrust runs deep and the path to peace is uncertain. US, Russia, and regional powers scramble to mediate, hoping to prevent catastrophe. The decisions made in Tel Aviv and Tehran will shape the region for years. The era of shadow conflict is over. Open confrontation has begun. The world watches, hoping for wisdom, fearing the worst. The future of the Middle East hangs in the balance.